Mr. Benchwork here. Today we're going to be testing glue adhesives on HO scale track. In this case it's Atlas Code 83, but Pico and the other brands are all going to be relatively the same results. So we have 8 different adhesives we're going to be using here. We have a super glue, which is a CA glue. We have Gorilla Glue. We have a quad adhesive, which is typically used for soften and fascia work. We have a PL Max, which is typically used for adhering landscape blocks and that sort of thing. We have a Power Grab adhesive, which is typically for indoor projects. We have liquid nails for projects, which is the adhesive that most model railroaders grab when they're going to secure track. We have a Loctite Power Grab adhesive, which is the Max Power marketing stuff. And then there's also Type Bond 2, which is a semi-water resistant glue when dried. So with this adhesives test, I am trying to do it in a scientific way. I am making numbered sheets for both straight track and curved track, and we are going to abuse test these in a couple different ways to see how they hold up and see which glue we should use for projects going forward. And I will tell you that the results were really interesting, so stay tuned.
All right, good morning, guys. So it is the next morning. So these have sat for about 12 hours.
How about that?
So we have gone ahead and I've gone ahead and removed all of the push pins. They all came out just fine. And I wanted to go over some things, particularly with how the glue went down and just my general thoughts on the application process. So as you saw in the time lapse, all of these I applied in the same way. I put about a 1/4 inch bead down the middle of the cork, and then I spread it with a spatula. Now that's typical. The one thing you will notice, however, is some of them were thicker, some of them were thinner, and that actually became something of note. So we'll just go ahead and try and do these in order. And so number one obviously was the super glue. Now obviously the super glue pretty much disappears. So you'll see there are some white spots here on the top of the ties. If you are painting your rails after you lay them down, I don't think this is a big deal. If anything, it actually adds a little more texture to the top of your ties. However, if you are going to choose this method, I would actually suggest super gluing the edge of the ties versus running down the middle. Either that or get one of those needle applicators. Thoughts on this one?
I mean, it is definitely nice. You're not going to see much under it. On the other hand, with the ballast, you won't see what's under there anyways for the most part. One of my concerns, though, is definitely going to be
longevity.
The longevity of it. It's not going to hold up like you'll get with some of these liquid nails type products that go down thicker and you got much more adherence to.
So, and one of the things we're going to be doing here in one of the subsequent shots to this video is we're actually going to torture test these things. So we're going to go ahead and take all of the curved pieces and I'm going to dunk them in water. Now, obviously that's an extreme case. But what I wanted to do is I want to represent what you would be doing when you're applying ballast, namely that you're going to be spritzing all of the track with water and wood glue to glue down your ballast after the fact. So me dipping the track is the most extreme possible, like you completely flooded your yard when you did it. You spilled your bottle of wood glue, whatever it may be. So that is the one test. The other test is I'm actually going to take all these straight segments and I'm just going to stick them outside in the sun for a couple days and we're going to see what happens. Because one of the things with these adhesives is they take a couple days to dry out. And so what the sun is going to do is it's going to apply heat, and it's also going to make all of those VOCs, all of the things that make these soft and plasticky just disappear. So after 3 or 4 days, that would be equivalent to sitting in a hot garage for a couple of years. So anyway, moving on.
They'll also get some torture testing because we're doing it in Florida rain season.
This is true, yeah. So Number 2 here is going to be the Gorilla Glue. Now, the one thing I did like about the Gorilla Glue is it did go down pretty thick, so it spread pretty easily. One of the things I do not like, however, is you'll see that it's kind of shiny. And what that tells me is that when I do go to apply a ballast of some kind, it might not stick as well as some of these other products. So that is something to be cautious of. It did, however, lay down okay. I don't see anything that's sticking up beyond the height of the ties, so you shouldn't have any issues covering it with ballast. However, it just wasn't my favorite to work with, and again, it's kind of shiny, so it's an issue. Any particular thoughts on 2?
2, like a couple of these other ones that went down thicker, 2 in particular though, it does raise up pretty high between the ties. So I have some concerns about getting ballast down the center if you're putting any there.
Okay. So number 3 here, 3 here was this guy here, which is, this one is actually one of the unique ones out of this pile. This is actually a high quality caulk that they use for exterior doors and windows. So it lays down a little differently, it seals up a little differently. So if somebody's replacing your vinyl windows in your house, this is more than likely what they're going to be sealing it against your brick or your siding or whatever it might be. I specifically wanted to try this because it comes in a number of colors, which means if you know you're going to be using a bright gray ballast, you can get the bright gray caulk. If you're going to be using more of a dirty black-brown ballast, you can actually get this in a wood-colored brown color as well. So I wanted to try it for that respect alone. So the nice thing about this particular one, and this is actually one of my personal favorites, is it did go down a little thicker. It was fairly easy to spread, and it's still fairly soft. It still gives underneath your fingernail. However, it is a nice, strong attachment, and there is no squeeze out between the tops of the ties, so it looks pretty good in that respect. Do you have any thoughts on this one in particular?
What's nice about using one like this is as you're putting it down, it's going to be a little more forgiving when you set the track in it. The dry time on it's going to give you a little more time to get everything set just right.
He makes a good point. It actually is going to make it, when it lays down smoothly like that, it is going to be a little more forgiving when you're placing your track and when you're going ahead and pinning it down or whatever method you're using. So number 4 is actually pretty similar. So this is the Loctite PL Max. This stuff is super, super thick. And in addition to it being a plastic cartridge here, it actually has an aluminum seal up here. So it tells me that this stuff is pretty sensitive to air. Now, one of the things I did notice with this particular one is it's a lot like number 3 here, the quad core stuff, in that it lays down super, super thick. But the difference between number 3 and number 4 is this stuff is like concrete. So if you are going to use this stuff, be aware that it's going to lay down beautifully, but it might transfer a little more sound than number 3 will. Now, this isn't going to be an issue unless you're running 50-foot-long trains. So if you're building a 4x8 layout, don't worry about it. But personally, I kind of like the fact that it's hard because you still have the cork layer, so you still have that give. But again, it was a little easier to lay down. You don't have any massive squeeze out between the ties again, so it's going to be easy to ballast. And then because it's hard, it's most likely not going to have any issues with water when you're laying down your ballast.
My other thoughts for it, unlike 2 and 3 here, it's one of the ones that went down the flattest. You still got some great adherence here, but it does give you a lot more space for ballast
Yeah, it's more
between
forgiving
the rails,
for sure.
or the ties, I should say. I also personally like the color that this one has. It's got some nice darkness to it.
Yeah, it actually is a great color. So majority of people are going to be using a gray-black ballast, something in that color family, something like a granite color. So this is going to blend very well. So if you are a little skimpy with your ballast, or you're not going to get to your ballast for 3 months, 6 months, a year sometimes, this would actually probably be a pretty good solution for that. So number five was the Loctite Power Grab. This was actually one of my least favorite out of the adhesives we're testing.
Looks
So
messy.
it is. It's extremely messy. So that's actually the one thing I wanted to point out is this stuff is very thin. So when you're spreading it with the spatula or the putty knife, it wants to stick to the putty knife rather than staying where you put it. And consequently, what that ends up doing is it ends up being a little more squeeze out between the ties, and then obviously it's just a little less clean as far as the presentation. Do you have any thoughts on this one?
I think we can both agree this is our least favorite. If you get the nice heads-on view there, it looks messy in how it came out.
Yeah, and I'll put some close-up shots at the bottom of the screen of each of these, just so you can have a better idea of what's going on. Number 6 is liquid nails, and this is usually the go-to for most model railroaders because it's fairly affordable. I think it was somewhere $3 or $4 a tube, so not bad price-wise. So the issue with this one, again, is like a lot of the other ones, it's going to be a little messier. It was a little thinner in viscosity when you were spreading it, so you do have to be a little more careful. However, it does have good adhesion. It is pretty good as far as appearance-wise, but like I said, there is a little more squeeze out, so there is a little bit bigger chance of this. And this was actually one of your favorites as well, wasn't it?
This is my personal favorite. Now, I say that without having torture tested it yet. But for look-wise at the beginning, it goes down kind of thin, yes, but you have some great adherence. Leaves plenty of space for your ballast to go down, and color-wise, it's one of my favorite choices going on there.
All right, moving on to number 7. Number 7, Loctite Ultimate. This one, if I recall, this was the one that was so much of a pain in the butt to put down. I actually had to remove the spray nozzle and just use it by itself. For that reason, I'm genuinely not going to recommend this because this was it was not fun. It does grab pretty well.
Like it went on really thick in that spot.
Yeah, and that's one of the troubles with this particular one is it goes on so thick and it's so hard to spread with the putty knife that when you do put the track on it, it just squeezes through all of the ties and it's just a huge mess. And because it's so thick, it's going to be difficult to clean that out as well. So for general purposes, I am not going to recommend this product for this particular application. If you were doing trim or something, however, in your house, absolutely grab this stuff because it's going to be great for just sticking something to the wall and making sure it actually stays there. But for what we're doing here, don't bother. Now, the last one was actually just Titebond 2. Now, Titebond 2 is just a good old-fashioned wood glue. However, it is semi-water resistant, so it's not waterproof. So you're unlike a regular wood glue that if you soak it in water, it's going to get loose. This stuff, if you spritz it with water, no big deal. If you soak it for a long time, you're probably going to have some problems. But I wanted to try this because some people have actually recommended it as the budget solution. So I wanted to give it a go, and it does have a few things going for it. So one is the ties are completely open and clean, so you don't have to worry about squeeze out or anything like that. It was very easy and fast to apply. It spreads down nice and thin. My question for this one is going to be when we do the torture test. Is it going to hold up? Is it going to hold up to the heat? Is it going to hold up to the wet? And so on. But so far, just laying it flat on a nice big straightaway or even a piece of the curb track, it does hold position pretty well. Now, you will, Josh did notice that, if you lift up on it, it will break loose. but generally, as long as you're not torturing the track, it should stay in place just fine. But we'll see. Thoughts?
I really worry about the long-term adhesion with the
Yeah,
wood glue.
so
It's not necessarily designed to stay bonded to the plastic that you get with our cross ties in the HO track. I mean, we love using this stuff all the time. We work with plywood, and it's great for that purpose. On this,
yeah, so as a professional model railroad builder, I'm probably not going to use wood glue, except for in certain circumstances, maybe where I'm using some custom-made track that already has wood ties. I might use it in that case, but otherwise, I'm generally going to go to one of these PVA adhesives because it's going to hold up longer, and it's going to be a little more secure. Keep in mind that we're currently building an enormous layout, and we're going to be driving it over 2,000 miles over to where it's going, and the whole time it's going to be sitting there vertically bouncing. In addition, it's going to be sitting in a storage box outside without being in a conditioned space for about 2 months. Yep. So it's going to be torture tested in the heat as well. So we want to make sure that whatever we're using is going to hold up well. Mm-hmm. And so if it holds up well for us, it's definitely going to hold up well for you. Okay guys, so it's been about 2 hours. It did rain for about 20 minutes, and the sun has finally just started to come out, so I came out here to review the results here. The most interesting here is actually going to be the Liquid Nails projects. It actually completely failed. So it's completely straight. It's not holding on anymore. This is actually a very surprising result and not one I would have expected. So I definitely do not recommend using Liquid Nails projects because when you start securing your ballast, you might potentially have some issues there. Number 3 also failed as well, and I'll put the name of these glues down at the bottom of the screen. So number 3 failed as well. Interesting way, however, it didn't fail completely, it just failed on the end. Now keep in mind, this is a pretty tight radius. This is about 12-inch radius. And I did that on purpose because this is a worst case scenario. And that's exactly what we're testing with all of this. So number 3 failed as well. Number 4 is just as strong as it was. It hasn't moved anywhere. So I'm pretty happy with that. So number 4 was one of the results that I really liked. Number 5 here. Number 5 is holding pretty well. I don't feel any looseness. So that one's okay. Number 8, that was the wood glue. So the only part that did come loose was the part that was already broken loose. The other half of it's still holding pretty strong. So provided I used a little more glue, I think this would have been all right. Number 7, I do have a little bit of movement on the side rail here. Not a whole lot. This one I think it'd be okay with ballast techniques. Number 2 here. Pardon the chickens. My neighbors just got chickens. Number 2 here seems to be holding just fine. Again, number 2, that was the Gorilla Grip glue. So shiny, and because of the shiny, I kind of figured it would probably be pretty water resistant or waterproof. It has softened up a little bit here on the edge from the water, but it is still holding plenty strong. And then finally, number 1, this is the super glue. This one is holding just fine. And again, the white marks here, that is just the artifacts from when I put the glue in because I was lazy about it. Again, I think if you put the super glue along the edges here, and if you're going to paint the track before you ballast, I think this would work out just fine. Hey guys, so it's been a couple days now. We have
gone ahead and done our water torture test for our curved pieces. We've done our heat torture test for our straight pieces. Now, the heat torture test, what I did is I put them in the back of my car, let them sit there for 2 days in roughly 160-degree heat. Now, it's not scientific, but it is an extreme case of what this stuff would go through, and it's nothing that your layout is likely to ever encounter. So what that means is if it failed here, it's most likely going to fail on your project at some point, but it might take a couple years. Versus this, it's failing instantly. So we know long-term what's going to happen versus, we know what's going to happen long-term in a very short period of time for the purposes of making this video. So starting with number 1 here, number 1 was our super glue. Now the super glue was kind of interesting because it actually did come loose. In both cases. So the bottom here is a little bit loose, the top is a little bit loose. And the one thing I did notice in particular with the wet test on the curve track here is you notice all these white splotches. Those really weren't there prior to the test. So the super glue itself actually absorbed a little bit of moisture, and it's actually how super glue cures. So it did end up turning white. But like I said in a previous segment, if you're going to be spray painting, if you're going to be weathering the track, this is okay because it just adds a little bit of extra texture to the track. So no big deal. I would not use super glue to secure an entire layout, but for small segments, a small diorama, something like that, super glue is going to be more than adequate. Any thoughts on this?
No. I mean, it's mostly shown what it can do here. It will give up in time, but like you said, if there's not a space that's going to be under heavy stress, it should hold up reasonably.
Yeah, and keep in mind, all of these tests we're showing you, none of these have ballast on them, and the ballast is actually going to be a secondary layer of securement for the track. And in most cases, a lot of people actually rely on the ballast to hold the track in place. The glue for setting the track is literally just to hold it there long enough to get the ballast on it. So, going to test number 2. Test number 2 was our Gorilla Glue. Gorilla Glue, in my previous segment, I think I said the thing I didn't like about it the most was the fact that it was shiny. Now, in this case, it did hold up reasonably well. The track did not move during the water torture test. It's actually pretty well secured too. I mean, it's pulling up.
Yeah, you're pulling the nails more than.
Yeah, so it's not going to go anywhere. So, in that regard, the Gorilla Glue is a great choice. It is not, however, going to be our choice for building layouts. And that's partially because it is that shiny feature. It's also bright white, which is going to be somewhat more difficult to hide with ballast than some of the other products. Number 3 was originally my favorite. And number 3 is the Quad. This is the sealant they use for sealing windows and doors and stuff like that. Now, this could be a case of the fact that it wasn't fully cured. This stuff does take a long time to cure, but for the purposes of building model railroads, we want to lay the track one day and then move on to the next segment the next day. So it's pretty important for us that it's set up good enough that it's going to be secure for the long haul. Now, this was our first failure, and it failed spectacularly. Wow. And matter of fact, number 3 here was actually the first one to fail out of any of the failures. And that was actually only about 25 minutes after we did the dip test. It is, however, pretty well secured. It's not going to come up. So provided you're not going to spill a cup of water on your layout, it might just be fine. But for our purposes, we want it to be secure for the long haul. We don't have to worry about it. We don't want to worry about callbacks. So for us, this is not acceptable, is it? No. It was a pretty interesting result, and it was interesting enough that I actually texted him while he was in the bathroom, no less, that, hey, take a look at the results on your way back in, because it's pretty surprising. Yeah. So, unfortunately, 3, my favorite, was a failure, but I think we actually found our favorite out of all of these. And that was actually number 4. Number 4 here. This is the PL Max Premium by Loctite. It comes out in a gray color, which is one of the things we really liked about it. It is super, super hard, so we do have to account for that, but it's no harder than the plastic ties of the track, so it's not going to affect sound, I don't think. So, and actually pushing on the ties, it's still flexing. So obviously it's not going to come up, and it did not move a millimeter in the water test. And even now trying to pull on it, it's not going anywhere. So this stuff is fantastic. And for the enormous layout we're building, this is actually what we're going to end up using for the whole project. So that's 400 pieces of flex track, about 80 switches, and about 3 months of work for us. So number five was the Power Grab Loctite Heavy Duty. I believe this might have actually been the most affordable of the options available that I purchased.
It was our original least favorite because of how messy it looks going down.
Yeah, it is an extremely messy product, and part of that is because it's how thin a viscosity is. It really takes a concerted effort with your putty knife to make sure that it's laid down in an even layer. There's no bubbles or bumps or anything. However, it did, over the last couple days, as it was curing, it did shrink down a little bit, so there's plenty of room for ballast along this. I do believe this would actually be a pretty acceptable solution for most people building a model railroad.
I mean, yeah.
Other than it being messy, it's not. There's nothing bad, right?
It's, you know, got that nice. It doesn't have any shine to it. It should blend in with the ballast. That's just the mess that I don't love about it.
Yeah, it was really messy to apply. Number six was the Liquid Nails Projects. This is actually a really surprising result because a lot of people actually recommend this for laying track. And after seeing this test result, I would not recommend this to anybody for anything, including projects at home. If you're going to use liquid nails, I would actually use the traditional liquid nails, which is actually a water repellent product, versus this, which obviously absorbs moisture in a very catastrophic way.
Yeah.
So this was, the second failure, and it actually not only separated, but it actually made a gap. So it expanded somehow. I'm not really quite sure how it happened, but I mean, there's not a whole lot holding this thing on here. This is not a product I would trust on my projects or clients' projects for that matter.
Now, when it's not wet, yeah, it does have great hold. I actually went and pulled through our staples there on the cork. But otherwise, I mean, that's a pretty catastrophic failure.
Yeah, and honestly, even though I did dip these in water, the amount of water that was actually on these was actually not much more than what you would get with a spray bottle when you're applying your ballast. Because typically people will apply their ballast and then they will flood the ballast with their glue water mixture. So it would be the same process in this case. So seeing this result is not a product I would ever want to use on a layout. So going forward, product number 7 here was the Loctite Power Grab Ultimate. Now keep in mind, this was the product that was so difficult to get out of the tube that I actually had to remove the end of the tube to get enough adhesive down to actually use the product. For that reason, I don't recommend it because it's too difficult to squeeze. I mean, even with a professional grade caulk gun, unless you're using an electrically powered caulk gun, I wouldn't use it.
It also went down super thick, especially like right there. But even here and here,
yeah, so it's a lot of squeeze out through the ties.
Above the rails.
Yeah, so if you were building a helix, for example, this might actually be a good product to use for that because it's definitely going to grab it. It's going to hold it very well. But as far as for scenic areas, it's not going to hold up in a way in which you're going to want to use it because you're not going to be able to get the ballast in there the way you want it to be seen. So if you're using an application where the track is going to be buried in a road or something, might be just fine. But if you're going to ballast it, I do not recommend using the Power Grab Ultimate. It's just way too thick of a product. Now, the last product here was actually the wood glue. Now, in this case, I did a boo-boo and accidentally started backwards. So I did a pull test on this one, and it actually held pretty well. And what I was trying to get at with my original take on this video before I realized I did them backwards, was that the wood glue would be fantastic for underneath pieces of track that might be pulled up in the future. Something that's not under stress. So something like switches or pieces of straight flex track that are going into, you know, a siding or something like that. It would be great for those situations because it holds very well, but it's soft enough that it's going to be forgiving. It's going to come off the track, so you can reuse it or move the track around in the future if you need to.
Yeah.
That said, I would not use it on curved track because the only way to get the wood glue to hold on the curve in an acceptable manner is to use an excessive amount of glue. And in this case, there's so much glue that sticks up above the track that you would end up seeing it through the ballast. So in this case, I would not use wood glue to secure your track on curves or anything that's going to be under stress, but it is perfectly acceptable to use underneath switches, pieces of straight track, areas that might get removed in the future. So that said, we have tested 8 different glues here, but chances are you've used a glue that we haven't tested here, and we want to test those too. So if you've used a glue on a layout that you don't see here, you want us to test it, please leave a comment down below. Let us know what it is, and we'll make another video here in another 6 months or so of testing those products as well, and we'll see who comes out the winner. But for right now, if you're going to be building a layout you want to hold up, I'm going to go with the PL Max Premium. And this stuff is going to be a great product to use on our project coming forward. So that's it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.